Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bryan Price. I work for the UVA Cancer Center. My office is located in Danville. I live in the lovely city of Cluster Springs, Virginia, which is right outside of South Boston. So you could say I have a lot of South Side covered by either where I live or where I work. So I'm sure all of you know what a hot button topic implicit bias is today, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now and in the world previously. Because of the pandemic that we happen to be going through, those things are a little heightened. They're a little enlightened, and they're brought to the forefront of our minds. So it's important for us to have these conversations. Sometimes they're not comfortable conversations, but they're conversations that we need to have to understand exactly what's going on in our world and to understand exactly what's going on with the people that are around us. So today, I hope to take you on a little small journey. Hopefully, we're going to have a really good conversation about implicit bias. If you think that I'm going to talk for the next 2 hours, you are greatly mistaken. If you think you're going to hear my voice for 2 straight hours, you're very sadly mistaken. I have quite a few videos, and I also have breakout rooms that are throughout the presentation. So I hope that everyone will be involved and everyone will be engaged. And if you're ready, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. Can everyone see my screen okay? Heather, can you see it? Okay.
I can, sorry.
You can? Okay. All right. As I said, my name is Bryan Price. I am an outreach and engagement specialist with the University of Virginia. And today we're going to talk a little bit about unconscious or implicit bias today. Now, the first thing is I want to make sure that everyone is pretty familiar with Zoom, okay? If you look at the bottom of your screen, you take your mouse and use your arrow, you'll see at the very bottom of your screen a list of icons. You'll see the mute screen, you'll see the video button, you'll see how many participants are in the room, you'll also see a chat button, and on the far right-hand side or on the right-hand side of the icons, you'll see a reactions button. I encourage you to ask questions, but with as many people as we have on this Zoom meeting today, it might be difficult if everyone unmuted themselves and tried to talk at one time. So I have my lovely Vanna White, known to you as Heather Spencer, that's going to be checking the chat constantly. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand, and hopefully I'll be able to see it. If I won't be able to see it, Heather should be able to see it. And just please put a question if you have one in the chat box. Also, if you have a camera and you have the bandwidth to use your camera, please turn your camera on, because we're going to have conversations, and it is much easier to have a conversation when you can actually see that person's face. So if you have the bandwidth and you have the ability, please turn on your camera so that others can see your face when you ask your questions, and especially when we go into the chat rooms, so that people can see your face when we have those conversations. Okay? Everyone good? Everyone understand? Okay? So let's get started. I have 5 specific goals for today. I want to talk about what implicit bias is. I also want to talk about what the difference between implicit bias, prejudice, and racism actually is. We know that in today's world, all of those terms are being thrown around willy-nilly, and they may not be the correct term for the correct thing that you're saying. So we want to make sure that people understand the difference between implicit bias, between prejudice, and between racism. So we also want to talk about, once you know what implicit bias is, how does it affect our daily lives? How does it manifest itself? And we don't even realize it in our daily lives. And in the invitation to participate, Heather sent out the link for the IAT test, or the implicit association test. So we're going to talk a little bit about those, okay? And then finally, I hate going to trainings where people give out great information, but they don't give me anything to do with it. They don't give me anything of how to take this information and use it in my daily life. So at the end of the presentation today, I hope that we can identify and come up with some ways that we can actually use this implicit bias, or stop using the implicit bias in our daily lives, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I have a video. Like I said, you're not going to hear me talk for 2 hours. I have a video that we're going to start out with that video. And so just please give me a second so I can pull it up. And if you would, just let me know if you can see it.
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's there.
It's there? Okay.
Yep.
While they were on the way to school in the family minivan. Let me tell you a story. Little James was really excited about bring a parent.
Brian, we see the screen, but we don't hear the video or see it playing.
Say that again?
We could see the screen, but we couldn't hear it, and couldn't see it. It wasn't playing.
Okay. Let me try it again. How about that?
Okay.
Let me tell you a story. Little James was really
It's there.
excited about bring a parent to school day for his 3rd grade class. While they were on the way to school in the family minivan, they got pulled over for speeding. The car was moving so fast that instead of just getting a warning or a ticket, they were taken to traffic court. As James walked into the courtroom, the disappointed judge gasped, "My goodness, that's my son." Who do you think James is looking across the courtroom at? Most people picture James's dad. Why do you think that is? The answer, in a nutshell, is a four-letter word, bias. That sounds like a dirty word, and people often get defensive when they hear it. But the reality is we all have biases. In fact, it's the way the brain works. So what exactly is bias? Simply put, bias is a favorable or unfavorable prejudice about something. Let's break that down a bit. First, bias can be positive or negative. It's often used in a negative context, but the word can be either favorable or unfavorable in its meaning. Prejudice is a prejudgment. We all use them. The brain often makes quick, often unconscious associations and judgments about all sorts of things. That we make these assumptions, often called unconscious bias or implicit associations, isn't necessarily a problem. As I said before, this is literally how our brains are wired to work. The part that becomes problematic is when we don't recognize these associations and they have negative consequences for people in specific situations. If we go back to the story I started with, there are a number of associations most people make based on the details I provided. There were holes in the story I shared, and the brain logically fills them with details or assumptions based on our preconceived unconscious ideas. For example, when I said judge, many picture a man. This is true for lots of prestigious professions and also for the highest ranks within most professions. And it's important to point out that women and men both visualize James's dad. Also, knowing James was in a minivan on the way to school makes some people envision a woman, his mom, driving him to school. Some will argue if his mother were taking him to school, logically, his father would be in the courtroom. However, it's quite possible that James has two mothers, or is in the car with a step-parent. I never said who was driving. It could have been James's nanny, grandparent, neighbor, older sibling, or anyone for that matter. This simple story illustrates how easily our unconscious bias creeps into our thinking. Once you've accepted that everyone, including you and me, has biases, you can work to better understand your own. Project Implicit is a great resource that's based on social science research conducted at leading institutions. I've included a link to their free implicit associations tests in the exercise files. These tests will give you a window into some of the unconscious biases that you have related to gender, religion, race, mental illness, or any number of other characteristics. We all have biases, and sometimes they're good, but they can be problematic, particularly if we aren't willing to explore how they influence our thinking. Think back to the story I shared at the beginning. When I asked, "Who's James looking at across the courtroom?" whatever answer you gave should give you a good sense of what might be your own biases. Now that you're aware they exist, question your own assumptions going forward.
Okay, so what did everyone think of that? Can you feel free to put it in the chat to give us some idea, I think, of what you think about that particular video. I think it's a great way to start off. I think it's a really good video because it's not accusatory. It doesn't place blame, and it shows that quite a few of us, if not all of us, have some type of biases. So let's go back and keep going. All right. So I want to give you a good definition of implicit bias. When you think of implicit bias or unconscious bias, it's social cognition involving associations outside of conscious awareness that lead to a negative evaluation of someone based on irrelevant things such as race or gender. So let's break that down just a little bit. It's an association outside of your conscious awareness. So it's something that you don't even think about. You put, if you say 1 and 1, 2, that's something you don't even think about. It's just in your head. And then an implicit bias leads to a negative evaluation of someone. As they said in the video, as the young lady said in the video before, we all have biases. Every last single one of us has biases, okay? It's when those biases become and lead to us having a negative evaluation of someone. And so that's what the true definition of implicit bias is. And just to give you an idea, of course, here's another video.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We've never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So when you think about implicit bias, as they said, you think about things like, if you think of peanut butter, what automatically comes to your mind? And please write it in the chat. If you think about cake, what automatically comes to mind? For me, it's ice cream. I think of cake and ice cream. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you think about a burger, I automatically think of fries. Some people think of onion rings or different things like that. And then when you see in the top corner, you see a blonde and she's twirling her hair. What's the automatic assumption you have about her? You think, yeah, she could be, maybe not too smart. She may be girly. She may be ditzy. She may be those things. But those are things that have been programmed to us Those are things that we've seen forever and ever and ever and a day, and they're just biases that we naturally have. What gets us into trouble is that those biases can impact how we deal with people in different ways. It could be how we deal with someone's race. It could be how we deal with people that have an ability or have the lack of an ability. It could also how we deal with people in their genders. I think about it all the time. I weight lift. That's what I do. I like to lift weights. And people in the gym automatically think that women can't lift like men can lift, right? And I've seen some ladies that have put men to shame because of the way that they lift and the way that they take care of themselves or the way that they run or the way that they play ball. But if you think you can use those implicit biases to affect people's gender, and then also their culture and also their language. It's easy to think about people that don't speak the same language that you do. You think something about them. You think something about, just because you hear that particular language, you think differently. And it's very funny. I've been very fortunate to be able to travel to different countries and different continents around the world. And it's an interesting thing that they say. They say when they're in their country, they learn to speak many languages, right? So they say most people are multilingual. And what do they say about people who only speak one language? They call them Americans. So it gives you an idea of how people think about us, because we typically, I know we take Spanish and French and Mandarin and all these things in school, but how many of us actually speak those languages? But if you think of some people from foreign countries, they not only know their language, but they know English as well. So bias can come in many different forms and in many different ways. Now, this is something that, especially today, especially during this time that we're in right now, as I said in my opening, people are throwing the word racism, they're throwing the word prejudice, they're throwing the word implicit bias to a lesser degree, but they're throwing all of those things around, and they're not exactly the same. They're not exactly the same. They mean really three different things. And so I want to make sure that we understand the difference of what prejudice is and what exactly racism is, how they're related, how they're intermingled, but they are three specific different things. Okay? Now, if you look at prejudice, prejudice is a preconceived opinion that's based on reason or actual experience. Okay? Prejudice can result in racism. Okay? And prejudice mainly caused by ignorance, and in most times is less destructive than racism. Now, if you take racism, racism is a belief that all members of a particular race possess some different characteristics. Okay? Now, those characteristics could be positive, could be negative, but the race that is using racism feels that their race is more superior to others. And there are levels to this. There are many different levels of racism, okay? And racism is a result of prejudice. And it's often caused by dislike and hatred towards someone or dislike towards another group. And then it definitely has more destructive results than prejudice. Now, and I really like the bullet points on the right-hand side of the screen, because I think it's a good explanation to show you the difference between racism and prejudice. And prejudice is an individual dislike. That may mean the dislike that, using myself for an example, for those of you that know me, you know that I went to Virginia Tech. Okay? That's where I went to my undergrad. I'm a huge Hokie fan. I have season football tickets. You know, I wear my maroon and orange wherever I go. Okay? And our arch rivals happens to be the people that I currently work for right now. So do I have a prejudice against UVA people who, when I was going to school, said they were snobbish and, you know, they were elitist? And some of them are, but, you know, elitist and all that kind of thing, that's a prejudice. So I am prejudiced towards UVA people, and I have a bias for anything that's Virginia Tech. Okay? But racism is having the power to deny opportunities to another group of people. Now, if me using the system, using a corporation or a school, because if you look on the bottom, racism is often committed by institutions. In my work at UVA, if I did not hire any UVA graduates because they were UVA graduates, I would be using my prejudice for their harm, which could be racism towards them. So I hope you understand the difference and the layer, that prejudice may be an individual thing, but racist is often utilizing corporations, the legal system, schools. If, you know, you would have to be under a rock today to realize that you can see how the health disparities, especially health disparities for those that are underserved and those that are underrepresented, are just manifesting themselves even greater during this pandemic. And it's just making it even worse for them because of everything that's going on. So, any questions? Here's another example, okay? Here's another example that I thought was a really good example of prejudice and racism. If you're prejudiced, you may see somebody that's in a wheelchair and think they're not too smart. You know, or you see someone that may have a lack of ability, and you say, well, you know, they may not be too smart, or they may not be able to do this or that, and they can. Whereas racism is a group of white kids that get together and bully the few black kids that happen to be in that school. So that'll give you a good definition of what the difference is between having a bias, okay? That means you just may prefer something, okay? That means you just may prefer something. Having a prejudice and racism, okay? Any questions? Anybody need any further clarification or anything before we keep going? All right. And of course, we have another video.
Implicit bias exists when we unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. For example, we often harbor negative stereotypes about others without consciously realizing that we do so. Implicit bias, which is also called unconscious bias or implicit social cognition, is a prejudice that is deep-seated within the brain, below the conscious level. Studies have demonstrated implicit bias against racial groups, genders, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups. We may even be prejudiced against our own group, although we tend to favor our in-group with positive stereotypes and disfavor out-groups with negative stereotypes.
The immediate feeling you get or the immediate thoughts you have about a person, an assumption you feel, just anything you feel really stems somewhere from an experience you've had or your upbringing.
Depends on the region you're from, the country you're from, the background you grew up in. That shapes the person's unconscious bias.
I think sometimes you don't even realize it, but your own actions, maybe the way you treat others as opposed to treating others that look like you or that act like you or that are your friends.
Implicit bias often runs counter to people's conscious, expressed beliefs. Few physicians espouse racially discriminatory views, and yet doctors tend to recommend less pain medication for black patients than for white patients with the identical injury. In other words, people can be explicitly unbiased, yet implicitly biased, according to psychologist Daniel Kelly and colleagues.
One of my closest friends since high school, we've worked on a lot of projects together, we've been in a lot of classes together. Sometimes we'd be working together in a group project, for example, and she would say stuff like, oh, you're good at math, you're good at science, here, you can take this part of the project or something. I don't hold it against her or anything, and she doesn't mean any harm by it, but obviously there's that implicit sort of bias or stereotype that Asians are better at math and science.
Implicit bias has been found in a large array of studies using various tests, but much of the evidence for the phenomenon comes from Harvard University's Project Implicit website, home of the Implicit Association Test, or the IAT. Literally millions of people have visited this site and taken various tests that ask them to respond rapidly to questions that require them to associate blacks or whites, males or females, or young or old, etc., with positive or negative words.
Most of the implicit biases that I've run into are probably positive ones, things that come with being a white male and having height and having a good voice and things like that.
Professor Nosek and colleagues tested more than 700,000 subjects and found that more than 70% of white subjects more easily associated white faces with positive words and black faces with negative words, concluding that this was evidence of implicit racial bias. In fact, additional evidence indicates that measures of implicit bias better predict people's conduct than measures of explicit bias.
I think that if you are anyone, to be blunt, that it's not a white male, you potentially feel that implicit bias. Maybe you're just looking for someone that is like you because you like you, and so you want to be around more people like you. But what's really rooted under that is that you potentially don't think that someone else is as smart or as capable, and that is coming from a place of implicit bias.
Now here's some good news. Various scientists have criticized the IAT. They point out, for example, that individuals who take the test on different dates often score substantially differently. Even IAT supporters admit that implicit bias, at least as demonstrated by the test, is widespread but relatively minor and has only a small impact upon people's real-world actions. In other words, the results of the test are not strong enough to predict particular behaviors by individual people. However, let's not get too comfortable. Even if the IAT cannot predict the future conduct of any one individual on a given occasion, it still indicates how groups of people will act on average, and that is worrisome. For example, few people openly advocate for discrimination in hiring, but white applicants receive 50% more responses from potential employers than do black applicants with the same resume. Likewise, college professors are substantially more likely to answer student emails if the students' names indicate that they are probably white than if the names sound like they belong to black students. And in one study, online course instructors were 94% more likely to respond to discussion posts by white male students than by other students.
There are a lot of opportunities to promote people within the workplace. It doesn't happen because of different biases. People assume, you know, a woman is of a certain age or they're married and you think, oh, she's going to want to have kids, so we're not going to give her this really tough, big project.
When I graduated from West Point in 2009, I went to my first organization, the first unit assignment. I was the only Latino officer in a group of about 100 other officers. Yeah, I think there was a lot of hesitation in really following my lead as a leader for the organization. I think it hindered in some way the ability for us to build cohesive trust within our organization and really have that going into a combat environment.
Because implicit bias operates at a mostly unconscious level, it is difficult for individuals to overcome. No existing training regime has proven particularly effective at debiasing implicit bias. But, fortunately, some research shows that stereotypes can be unlearned, and that safeguards can be put in place to minimize their impact. For example, women used to make up only a relatively small percentage of the musicians in orchestras. But when orchestras began holding blind auditions, where the applicants played behind a curtain and their genders were unknown to the judges, the percentage of women chosen to play in symphony orchestras doubled. Perhaps we can put a dent in implicit bias after all.
These biases are sometimes so deep-rooted within us or within our culture that we don't even realize that they are biases.
We could have a mutually, beneficial conversation and really benefit from learning from each other and really understand that we're all not that different.
Listen, really absorb the experiences of those around you, especially those who come from backgrounds that are unlike yours.
Learn something new about a person, and then that will kind of help shift that bias, because now you've actually asked that person, or now you get to know that person.
There's so many opportunities to engage with others, to say, I don't want to do this again. Can you help me not do that? And people are willing to have those conversations.
Okay, now it's time for the breakout room, Heather, for breakout room number 1. And what I want you to do in your breakout room is everyone please turn on your camera so that the people in your breakout room can see your face. And what I want you to do is I want you to talk about the biases that you think you may have, or the biases that you think you may have become aware of today. And then I also want you to talk about some of the biases that you have either seen in your work, in your church, or in your school, some of the biases that you have seen, so that we can get a good idea of what people are actually seeing and what's actually going on. So Heather is getting ready to break you into groups. And
How many minutes?
Okay. Feedback. Thank you. So if you've never participated in a breakout room, what's going to happen is in a second, Heather's going to click the breakout rooms, and then a window is going to come on your screen, and it's going to say you have been invited to breakout room number such and such and such and such. So all you have to do is click on join, and it will automatically take you out of this big room and take you into one of the smaller rooms where you can have a conversation. And then 60 seconds before that time is up, it will come with another message that says it is time to come back to the main room. So you'll probably have anywhere from 7 to 8 minutes, and it's only going to be about 4 or 5 people per room, maybe 6 in some rooms. 6. Okay. So please feel free to share some of your biases that you realize that you have. And also, if you've seen some biases in your professional life, please share those. Okay? Everybody good?
Yep.
I think. Okay. Can we get 1 or 2 people to report out to talk a little bit about what their room was talking about?
That's a question, right?
You're breaking up, Chad. For me, it's
I would like to ask a question if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
So one of the person said,
Chad, we can't hear anything you're saying. You're breaking up.
You sound like the teacher in Peanuts. That's about all I'm getting. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
That's better. That's better.
Okay. So one person in that group said, I automatically assumed they was in my position. They're getting paid more. At what point does it become a bias? And then there's unknown facts. Because the women getting, what is it, 75% of the job listed men. So at what point?
Chad, can you type in whatever it is that you want to ask?
Yeah, sorry about it.
I think I got a gist of what you were saying. And Chad, if I'm wrong, please type it in the chat for me. But I think you were asking at what point does it progress from a bias to a prejudice or to racism or to something like that? Was that what you were, is that what the question was? Now I lost Chad. He's not shaking his head. Chad, put it in the chat, and I'll answer it. I promise I'll answer it. Anyone else want to share? Don't you just love technology?
Mm-hmm.
Just love technology. Doing the best we can. Does anybody want to share, or do I have to call on somebody that I know?
I'll share.
Ready to say the same thing.
Okay.
I'll share. Can you hear me okay? I don't want to sound like Chad.
No, we hear you fine.
My name's Shermelle Motley, and I'm with DARS in Martinsville. We had a really good group. Without giving names, I shared about myself. As a black woman of color, I basically experienced it all my life. Long story short, I gave a specific example of having gone to Duke University undergrad and just feeling that all of my life, like I said, but also walking into a room, which as a predominantly white university, just walking in and feeling that the looks and the stares and, that feeling of not belonging and actually at times even being told or, there was another individual who was a young person who had a license. She was a licensed clinical social worker who talked about being in the school system and having been questioned at times when she would give her opinion or make her recommendations. And it was almost as though her age, because she was young, even though she had the credentials, she'd be questioned and someone else would be asked who was older and they'd have the same opinion. Then there was someone else who was an older person who said that they had experienced bias because of their age and what they had been through and how oftentimes they were seen as maybe slower or like, why are you still here type of thing. Or, they felt that I guess it would be biased, just because of still being in the workforce. And then there was another person who talked about being a person who had often shared or who chose to share at times about having some illnesses or disabilities and how that she learned sometimes not to share that because people would tend to treat her differently or act differently toward her. And then all of us being women, we talked a little bit about how, there were oftentimes biases with regard to being a woman in a workplace or in different settings. And so that was different, just getting the different perspectives from everybody. And, and of course, everybody had a little something extra. But long story short, those were very, good perspectives from our group.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody else? And then I'll answer Chad's question.
You did not answer Chad's question.
No, I said I will. I said I would say someone else wanted to share, and then I would answer Chad's question.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyone else want to share? Please don't make me call on you because I will.
I was going to say that our group seemed to focus in a bit on pay practices. That people had actually seen the prejudicial results, that the women were receiving less pay than the men, which I have also witnessed.
Excellent, 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 excellent. And I think looking at Chad's question was something similar to that, and about women in the same position not making as much as men because of their personal bias, even though the statistics prove it's true. Paid more because of their personal bias, even though statistics proves it's true. I mean, it's really bad, you know, and it's really tough because if you look at the statistics, you know, the statistics will clearly show you that depending on who you are and using a white male as the standard, everyone else is paid a little less depending on if you're not the standard. And in America and, you know, many, many different parts of the world, white males are the standard. And everyone else is judged off of that, whether that's right, whether that's wrong, whether that's incorrect, whether that's, you know, just complete made up. It is how most of us that are not white males, and not picking on the white males that are in the room, but they are used as the standard. And the rest of us are judged accordingly. And for some of us, I can never be a white male. No matter how hard I try, I cannot be a white male. And for any of my female counterparts that are in this room, you know, it's going to be very difficult for you to be a white male as well, you know. So it's tough, Chad. It is really, really tough. And the thing that we can do is continue to call it out, to continue to make sure that people are aware of it, because there are many, many people that are just as talented, if not more talented, that don't happen to be white males. Okay? Does that kind of answer your question, Chad? Kind of, sort of?
Yeah. I would just, yeah, yes.
Okay. All right. Now we'll keep going, and I'll share my screen again. And that leads me into exactly the next section, is how does it affect our lives? You know, you look at this word bubble, this bubble cloud, and you see implicit bias is the biggest word in it. But look at all the different ways that implicit bias can have an effect on what we do in our daily lives. And we heard a lot with the examples that people shared. But look at some of the things that, you know, it may be social. It may be, you know, those little subtle biases that, you know, people don't particularly talk about. And we're going to get into those very, very shortly. You know, and some of them are just plain out preferences. They may be decisions. They may be behaviors. There's a lot of different things that, in different ways that implicit bias affects us in our daily lives. So we have another video to illustrate that point.
Hi, Mom, it's me. I got in trouble again at school today.
Hi, this is Miss Jones again. I'm finding your son very disruptive in class, more so than other students.
I feel like the teacher doesn't like me. Other kids do bad things, but they don't get in trouble.
He's defiant and shows a real lack of respect for any structure or authority.
I hate school because the teachers are always mean to me and I don't feel like I'm learning anything.
I'm really concerned about his behavior.
I'm always getting in trouble for what I didn't do.
We're going to have to adopt a zero-tolerance policy, young man.
School keeps calling my mother, and she gets really, really mad at me.
What is going on? You better explain.
You know, like the whole world is turned up against me. It doesn't like me anymore. There are days I get up and I just decide I'm not going to school.
And we go to the park. Like, everybody's always telling me I'm not worth anything, so what's the point of trying?
I know the cops are watching us, but we just hope you don't get caught.
Your son's absences are a problem. They will definitely affect his grade point average.
I don't feel safe in my class anymore.
Should I assume you're unprepared again today?
I would always eventually get picked on by the teacher. He makes examples of me.
I feel really singled out, and I just try to avoid people because every time I look, somebody's always talking about me. Oh, she's always getting in trouble.
But I started fighting more because nobody wants to hang around a troublemaker. The only time I have real friends is when I'm on the block. So that's why I stay.
I'm sure you understand we take our discipline policies very seriously here at the school. What are we going to do about your son?
So what did you think about that video?
It hurt my soul.
I mean, you just think about, you may wonder, well, how does implicit bias, how was that an example of implicit bias? If you think about that last statistic that they showed, and the statistic said that Black and Latin kids are expelled at a higher rate than white kids are expelled. And it's that perception that Black kids are doing something wrong, that Black kids are being more disruptive than white kids are being. So you look at just that little implicit bias, and the statistics have proven that that's not particularly true, okay? But it's that implicit bias that people think that is true, and look how it affected that young man's life from just that one implicit bias thought, and what chain of events could lead because of that implicit bias. And that's just one way of how implicit bias affects in our daily lives. You look at the screen right now, the slide that I have up. I mean, you see people of all different shades, all different races, and when you look at them, you have automatic thoughts that come to your mind. You have automatic impressions of what that person is. You know, if I'm going to, for instance, take the Black gentleman with the glasses on. He's got on, you know, his shirt and tie and his suit, you know, and he looks real, you know, studious and all that kind of stuff. And that's a bias. That's an assumption that I'm making. Okay? But what if that same guy had a hoodie on without his glasses? How would that change your impression of looking at that young man with the picture? And how might that change how you treat him or how you interact with him, just because if he took his glasses off and put a hoodie over his head? How might that happen? So if you look on your left-hand side, there are many, many different ways of how implicit bias affects us. It affects us with stereotypes. In a video a little while ago, a young lady said that, you know, people came up to her and said that she was good at math. They came to her because she was good at math. Because the stereotype is all Asians are good at math and they're good at science. That's the stereotype. You know, you've got stereotypes on ethnicity, on gender, on race. You look at the young lady on the second row that has on the hijab. I did this training last week for the Averett University Bonner students, And I had one young lady that was in the class that wears a hijab, and she gave an example of people come up to her and they ask her, where are you from? And she looks at them and she says, New Jersey. And they say, no, no, no. Where's your family from? You know, and so it's just those ways that it can affect your life. Hidden in blind spots. We all have those blind spots that we just don't see. Talked about prejudice, and then it's the one right above at the next to the bottom, microaggressions. That's something that I wanted to talk about and wanted to spend just a little second on, not a lot of time, because I could do a whole class on microaggressions. Okay? And what a microaggression is something is a statement that's made or an attitude that's portrayed on someone that is not really, that is meant as a compliment, but is not really perceived as a compliment. And I can give you one right off the top of my head. It's one that drives me absolutely positively crazy. And it's the one when people come up to me and they say, you speak so well. You talk so well. And and you know, at first I used to just take it in and, you know, didn't pay that much attention to it. And then it started to irk me, you know, and finally I got to the point I started asking people when they say that, I speak well compared to whom? How am I supposed to speak? And when is the last time you have said something to a white person, you speak well? And people don't, but you know, the person that said that to me, they were complimenting me on my presentation. But they said to me, you speak well. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to speak? How is someone that looks like me, what are we supposed to sound like? And so there's a whole class that has been developed on microaggressions. And hopefully sometime soon that will be ready to go. But it's microaggressions. All right. It's time for another. Heather, you want to say something?
Oh, no, I was going to say I think I know what our next workshop will be.
I'm telling, and let me share something with you. I was talking with a colleague of mine, and I was telling her how I was tweaking my presentation and working my presentation, and how much time I was spending on microaggressions. And she is a very educated young lady. She has her master's degree in public health, and she asked me, "What is a microaggression?" Because she'd never heard of a microaggression. And she came back, and when I told her my example, she said, I've said that to many people. And not knowing her implicit bias in saying that to me was that her bias said that a person that looks like me is not supposed to speak well and not supposed to be articulate. But that wasn't what she was meaning, but that was what her bias had led her to believe. Okay? So, see what time it is. We'll keep rolling. All right? Another video.
Up in low-income communities, attended the same low-performing high school, graduated with a 3.5 GPA, and are starting their higher education journeys at their local community college. There is one key difference. Joe is white, and Gabby is Latinx. As they begin their studies, they enter an educational system with statistical differences in how students of different races and ethnicities are treated, even those that come from identical socioeconomic backgrounds. The assessment test placed both in developmental English. The counselor recommended that Joe take the Pilot English 101 class with a supplemental learning community, while Gabby stick with the developmental English course, explaining that it's great practice for ESL students. Gabby has been speaking English since birth. Joe loved English 101. Reading books by Tobias Wolff and Jeanette Walls that tackled issues affecting low-income white communities resonated with Joe. Gabby related to some of the assigned essays, but felt that none really spoke about the Latinx experience. This puzzled Gabby. More than half the students in the class are Latinx. Surely the instructor could have chosen some Latinx authors. And to make matters worse, when the class discussed the only essay by a Latinx author, the instructor turned to Gabby and asked, "What do you think, Gabby?" Out of the top 100 texts assigned in English classes at higher education institutions across the country, 88 are by white authors, 10 by black authors, and 1 each by a Native American and Latinx author. Joe felt at home at college. The instructors were supportive. Most were white like Joe, and their educational experiences matched Joe's. But Gabby noticed that most of the Latinx adults were clerical staff and groundskeepers. Few were on the faculty, administration, or on the walls in portraits. Faculty of color are underrepresented in higher education. Gabby and Joe both showed interest in becoming engineers. But when Gabby expressed that interest, a counselor suggested Gabby look into the HVAC program. The pursuit of STEM degrees disproportionately favors white students. 5 years later, Joe transferred to the flagship state university. Gabby is still at the community college, credits shy of completing a degree. The odds are in Joe's favor. In fall 2016, UC Berkeley, for example, admitted 1,138 white and 713 Latinx transfer students from the California community colleges. At the Center for Urban Education, our research shows that the disparity in their college experiences are manifestations of institutionalized racism. We have found that higher education's mission to provide all students with equal educational opportunity is often stymied by taking for granted, presumably race-neutral policies and practices that in reality confer unearned advantages to white students like Joe and compound disadvantages for racially minoritized students like Gabby. Left unexamined, these policies and practices perpetuate racial inequities. Using the methods of critical action research and critical inquiry, we help college practitioners identify areas of racial inequity on their campus, uncover how institutionalized racism is embedded in college policies and practices, recognize racialized patterns in their actions towards students, and remediate policies and practices in order to close equity gaps. Our work empowers practitioners to become equity-minded change agents who have the critical consciousness, will, and know-how to combat institutionalized racism and bring about racial equity.
I think that's a pretty good example. Another example to show you how just an implicit bias can lead to different outcomes for different people. And I don't know if you were counting the number of implicit biases that were present in the room or present in that particular scenario, but there were quite a few. I mean, there were just so many that just pile up upon each other, and they lead to negative outcomes for people. So if you think about, just the first one, a male versus a female, so the implicit bias is that males are better at STEM than females are. So they're going to be steered in two different directions. A white person versus a Latin person, I mean, I think we're all pretty aware of the statistics of if you take a special education class or take special ed in schools, the majority of students in special ed are black or brown. They're not white. So if you add those different implicit biases, instead of getting, I mean, the young lady was put in remediation, and they both had the same scores, you know, so you have to wonder why these things occur and why these biases affect people in the way that they do. So it's very
Pam has a question.
Who does?
Pam.
Okay, Pam, go ahead.
Are college students preparing for a teaching profession exposed to these statistics and information?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And even the teachers that are currently doing it, currently teaching now, are exposed to these numbers. And sometimes it doesn't change. And it's sometimes it transcends race. And I'll give you a perfect example. If I was talking about earlier, and in the video earlier, they were talking about how kids, black and brown kids, are expelled more than white kids are expelled. There was a big study, and the study has been done. It was done, I believe, in the 60s the first time, and it's been done recently. And what they did is they had teachers, and they had teachers looking at kids playing. And what the teachers were doing, they were looking at the kids, and they were judging their movements and judging which children were the most problematic. And it came out the most problematic kids, as perceived by the teachers, were the black and the brown kids. And it didn't matter if the teacher was white or the teacher was black and brown. It was that thought, that bias, that black and brown kids are more disruptive, should we say, in class. And I can tell you from personal experience, if I had been a student right now, I probably would have been diagnosed with ADHD. I probably would have been on Ritalin. Because if you asked me to sit for 8 hours, I mean, that would drive me absolutely positively crazy. As a matter of fact, I'm at my office standing up now because I can't sit for that long. So if I were in the situation that some of the kids are in now, I don't know if I would be where I am now because of that. Okay? So I hope that answers the question. Yes, they are being exposed to this information, and hopefully in the future it will make a difference. So now it's time for breakout rooms, and part of your, yes ma'am, she got a finger? Did I get a finger?
Don't forget about the poll.
Okay, that's right. That's right. Okay, we're getting ready to go to breakout rooms, but Heather has a poll for you, and she wants to take the poll. So, Heather, can we do the poll first? Is that good?
Oh, I forgot to unmute myself. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And you should see on your screen right now is a poll. And the first question is, for those, if there's anybody that's on the phone, the first question is, which implicit bias assessment did you complete? Okay. And I see some numbers coming in. I see right now race is leading. I see race is definitely leading. I wonder why too many people didn't do the countries one. But I see a lot of people that did race. And so we're going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. And it seems like 42% of the people did race. And then the next greatest one, skin tone and weight. Skin tone and weight. So that's interesting. That's interesting. Can we go to number 2, Heather?
Oh, that's all three of the questions were there.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Oh, I must have missed it. Okay.
Oh no, I just cleared it all.
Thank you, Heather. Okay.
That just hurt my whole soul.
It's all right, because they're getting ready to answer both of these questions and the next one, so it's cool. All right? So what I want everybody to do is I want everybody to take out your phones and screenshot my questions so that you have something to reference by when you get ready to go into your breakout rooms. And what I want you to share in your breakout rooms is how many modules did you take? What surprised you the most? What was par for the course? And how did you feel? When you took the test and you got the result, how did you feel? How did it make you feel? And then we'll come back and we'll have a couple people share. Okay? So Heather, if you're ready, I'm ready.
8 minutes again?
Yes, ma'am. So what I'd like to do is I would like one person, let me stop sharing my screen. One person to share out if they would, and I hope that people will put in the chat what your group talked about so we could all see it and we could all have an idea. Because I thought the test was really, really interesting. So I'm going to shut up for a minute, and then I want one person to please give me some results, what you talked about. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nobody? Maggie, would you do me that favor, please? You're at the top of my screen, Maggie.
Sure. Yeah, so our group, everyone in our group just took one of the tests, but we were all kind of surprised by our results. I think, you know, it can be kind of shocking and a weird feeling to, you know, think that you're very aware of some of these biases, but then the results to show, you know, that it still is pretty strong, you know, within your unconscious, I guess. I think we talked about too how just the process of taking the test is kind of a weird experience, because a lot of us talked about how you're thinking about like, oh, I don't want to choose the wrong answer, and you know that's not quite how it works, but just how that sort of impacts, you know, how quickly you move and kind of some of the mistakes you do or don't make, and so I think. Yeah, we all kind of I think we're a little bit surprised kind of by our results. And then we talked about, you know, just like, you know, the results being reflective of like our, you know, where we grew up and like the environments we lived in, the social context, you know, that we're part of. We were kind of wondering like how over time, how those things can change. Obviously you could become more aware, but you know, we wondered, like, can the actual hardwiring in your brain, like, actually change? You know, or will these biases always be there? You just learn how to deal with them. So it's kind of a question we were just kind of talking about at the end. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you for setting me up. I appreciate that greatly. Sure. One thing I wanted to let everybody know, and I don't know if you remember it from one of the previous videos I showed, there is a little pushback from the IAT test, and it's because the IAT, Brandy, you've already heard this, so you can turn your head a little bit. But the IAT test is a point in time. It is your feelings, your reflections at that particular time. So they can change as you age, as you become more aware, as you become involved in different situations. They can change, but it is a picture of your biases at this particular time. And then another thing you have to take into consideration is the technology in which you used to take it. If you had a keyboard that was very, very sensitive, then you may have been easy to make mistakes. Or if you took it, you know, 5, 10 years ago, your keyboard may have been not as technologically advanced as it is right now. So your reaction time may have been completely different. So that also affects your scores. But it is a good representation of where you are right now at this particular time, at this particular point, and hopefully it enlightens you to where you are and also gives you an idea that when you criticize someone else, make sure you turn that criticism right back around and look at yourself and make sure that you've got your biases under control before you start talking about somebody else's bias. Because we all have them. We all have them. Now, as I promised you in the last 20 minutes that I do not like to go to trainings and not be able to give people some things that they could work with, some take-homes. And so let's get started on some of the take-homes. And I thought the take-homes were pretty good because they use the word implicit. And they use the letters in the word implicit. Okay? And so the first letter, the I, is talking about introspection. And that's what you do when you take the IAT test. You're taking that and you're exploring exactly what you have and what's inside of you and what biases you have so that you can become cognizant of exactly what you're doing and where you are. And so the first I, because there are three I's in implicit, the first I is for introspection. Okay? Then we go to the M. Okay? And the M is mindfulness. Okay? And one way that you can improve your score on your IAT is being more mindful of the biases that you currently have. Being able to know that, okay, I have a bias in this area, not let that bias affect me. Because when you're under pressure, when things start to go wrong, you fall back on what you already know. You fall back on what's comfortable to you. You fall back into old habits. So trying to be mindful, you can try to keep those things from happening and try to improve on the biases that you have. And then, the cute little diagram says, you can focus, breathe, and meditate and relax so you don't get into those stressful situations. Okay? The P stands for perspective. Okay? Consider what's going on from somebody else's point of view. Okay? And I'll give you a great example that happens to me or has happened to me quite often. When I have walked into meetings or walked into group events or walked into webinars, and I may have been the only black person in that room. Okay? And sometimes those experiences for me are difficult. Sometimes they can be traumatic. And at worst, sometimes those experiences for me have been toxic. But if I had people in the room that were cognizant that said, wait a minute, Bryan's the only black person in this room, we probably shouldn't ask him all the black questions. So being able to have that perspective of the person that's actually in that room, and I'm sure the ladies that are in this room, there may have been a time when you were the only lady that was in that meeting. And how the men in that meeting wanted to treat you like you were one of the guys and not taking into consideration your perspective, or they would ask you, Amanda Young, tell me how the women feel. And that's not cool. Okay? So I've got 2 more videos that I want to show you, and I want to talk to you. Hopefully this one will explain itself.
I'm better than you at 2K. I've been playing for longer than you have been alive.
What's
bro.
good?
Play
What's
me
good?
tonight.
Good.
Play me tonight, bro.
What's good?
Play me tonight.
What's good?
Monica. You made it.
Of course. I wouldn't miss our victory lunch. We worked our butts off on that project.
Right?
Am I the first?
Mm-hmm. Tim and Sonia just texted. They are on their way.
Great. I want to celebrate everyone's hard work on this project. You guys did such a good job. I really appreciate it.
You bet. I'm just glad we made it.
Oh, just water for now. But you might want to tell your manager about this guy last night. Kind of intimidating. Maybe have the police move him along or something.
Sure. I'll talk to my manager.
Great.
What are you doing? What? Call the police? Over those kids outside?
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but those kids can just hang out on some other street corner.
Oh, I see. You see the tall one out there? That's my son, Michael. We're going shopping for home clothes right after we're done here.
I am so sorry. I just heard on the news that someone was mugged over here.
And you thought my son did it?
No, of course not. God, you don't think that
You know what I think? I think this celebration is over. Thanks.
So what did you think about that? Think about all of the biases that she had just from that particular instance. Think about if she had looked from the perspective of the kids, would her reaction have been a little different? Or if the kids had looked more like her, would her reaction been a little bit different? So also, the L stands for learn to slow down. Learn to pause a little bit before you make an action. Pause. Slow down. I think, you know, in our world right now, we see in what it's called the Karens and the Beckys and everything that's going on right now, you know, and I was looking at her and I said, well, there goes Becky right there. There she is. You know, if she would learn to slow down and if she just hadn't let her particular bias come right out, it may have ended in a different way. And just think about how she has ruined that relationship, that working relationship going forward, because she didn't slow down. She didn't look at it from another perspective. She just jumped right in and said, you need to go get your manager to get these kids out of there, right? So look at it from a different perspective and also learn to slow down. You know, consider the positive examples. They were kids. They were standing out. They were talking. They were laughing. And they bumped into her. And they probably should have said, excuse me. Yes, I'll give them that. Probably should have said, excuse me. But think about how her reaction could have been a little different. Okay? So learn to slow down. The second I stands for individuation. Okay? For any of you that have taken the Strengths Finders test, this happens to be, it's my number one strength. It's my number one strength. And it's evaluating people based on their characteristics and not those of a group. Treat each person as an individual and not as a member of a group so that you can, what do they say? Judge people on their merit, so you can work on that. But that happens to be my number one strength finder, so I said I got to include that one, okay? So, all right. And then next one is the last video that I'm going to show you today, and it's a video that I got from a very good friend of mine, and I'm sorry that the picture starts off like that, but I'm sure you'll understand where the video goes really quickly.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean. But I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well.
Hello, Governor! What's all this then?
Dropping the bones into you.
Let's go sporties! Double, toil and trouble! Mind the gap! Beware Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Hip hip! Cheerio!
I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
Fish and chips.
I thought that was a great example. The next one, the C and implicit, check your messaging. Okay? Check what you say. Check how you relate to people. And for those of you that may take the microaggressions class, that video will be in the microaggressions class because that was probably one of the best reactions to a microaggression that I've ever seen. But check your messages, okay? Check how you say things to people. Make sure that there's no hidden agenda, because another one of my pet peeves is when people say you don't see color. And so I ask people all the time when they say to me, I don't see color, and I ask them, how do they drive? If you don't see color, how do you know when the stop sign is red and the go sign is green if you don't see color? How do you know that you're actually eating chocolate and not caramel because you don't see color? So be careful and check exactly what you're saying and make sure that you're cognizant of that fact. Okay? The last I, that stands for institutional fairness. And that's wherever you work, make sure you support a culture of diversity and inclusion. Make it a point to start talking wherever you work to make sure that things are looked at from an equity lens, okay? And make sure that, we can cut out the stereotypes, we can, put those to rest, but make sure that while you're at work, while you're in your church or in whatever group you're in, make sure that there is some institutional fairness. And then the T in implicit is take two, okay? None of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. All of us are going to make mistakes. All of us are going to say something that you wish you had never said in your life, but realize that we're going to make mistakes, and then just like anything, try to do better. Just don't make the same mistake again. Try to do better. So hopefully when you take all of those things together, you can recognize your implicit biases, and then you won't use them in a negative manner. So if you look at your clock, it is 2:56. Heather, we got done before 3 o'clock, and we did not start at 1 o'clock. So
we did.
We got done in under 2 hours. Now, if you have any questions, now's the time to ask questions. Please feel free to do so. I want to thank you all for spending the last 2 hours with me. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you had a little bit of thought. You know, it brought some things to your mind that I wasn't quite aware of, and then hopefully you have some marching orders, some little tips that you can take with you that you can use in your daily life. So, Heather, are there any questions? Anybody got any questions?